She stood at the edge of the table, silent. The briefing room hummed with static and muttered voices, but no one looked her way. Maps scattered across the wood, hands pointing, commanders exchanging clipped words. Men who had seen too much. Men who thought they'd seen everything. But not her. Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was something deeper, older, heavier than the room itself. They weren't cruel. They just dismissed her without realizing they were doing it, the way one overlooks a shadow on the wall. Her hand rested on the folder she'd carried in, paper creased at the edges, the kind of folder you didn't open unless you were ready to carry its weight. She waited. They never asked her to speak, but the folder held answers none of them wanted to hear. The colonel's voice cut through the room, gravel low, final. "We go at 400. Small unit, fast in, fast out. Don't improvise, we don't get a second chance." Murmurs, a nod, a scrape of chairs, orders done. And still no one had asked her. She wondered if any of them noticed how still she was, how quiet, how calm her breath had become as she rehearsed the silence inside herself. They thought it was obedience. It was survival. Because there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The mission wasn't just a mission. For her, it was personal. The night air outside carried the smell of diesel and dust. She pulled her jacket tighter, boots crunching gravel as she crossed the lot. The hangar lights burned halos in the fog. Engines murmured. Men laughed too loud, voices echoing false confidence. She didn't laugh. She never had before missions. That was her way. Her rifle sat in its case, steel and weight she knew better than her own heartbeat. She opened the latches one by one. Click, click, click. Each sound steady, deliberate, a ritual older than prayer. She ran her fingers down the barrel, checked the glass of her scope. No cracks, no dust, clean lines, sharp edges. Her life built in silence. They said women couldn't lead, that they couldn't carry weight in the field, that they were distractions, risks, liabilities. She had heard it all. She never fought those words. She simply kept moving past them. But tonight those words pressed against her chest heavier than her gear. Because tonight, she wasn't sure she could carry both the mission and the memory that burned inside her. She set the rifle back into its case and closed it. Her reflection caught on the black steel, blurred by the overhead lights. She hardly recognized the face staring back, eyes older than the skin around them, jaw too tight for someone her age. Once years ago that face had smiled easily. That girl hadn't known what it was to bury friends, to carry folded flags, to hear her own name whispered with doubt again and again until it hardened her like stone. She zipped the case shut, no more reflections. Later in the barracks the team lay restless, boots half unlaced, packs leaned against bunks. Men joked about food waiting back home, about girls they hadn't called, about debts unpaid. She sat alone at the edge of her bed, quiet. Her bunkmate Tors leaned back on his pillow, eyes half closed. He was young, too young, but his laugh carried something honest, a warmth that reminded her of her brother. "You don't talk much before these things," Tors said softly. She glanced at him. His eyes were open now, studying her, curious, not mocking. "Talking won't change what waits out there," she said. He smiled, faint but real. "Maybe not, but it makes the waiting easier." Her lips curved just barely. "For you, maybe." He chuckled and looked at the ceiling. "For me." His voice faded, but his presence lingered. A small thing, human, and for the briefest moment she felt less alone. But then the silence returned, thick, and in that silence her thoughts slipped back to the folder, to the one name inside it that no one else knew mattered. Her brother's name. The last time she saw him, he was laughing, slinging his pack over one shoulder, pretending the war couldn't touch him. He hadn't come back. His body was never found. Official reports said missing. She knew better. The coordinates on that folder matched the place he'd vanished. That was why she was here, why she hadn't spoken up, not yet. If they knew her true reason for being on this mission, they'd pull her out. They'd call her compromised. But compromise was the wrong word. She wasn't compromised. She was determined. And determination had kept her alive this long. The clock struck 300. Boots hit the floor, no more waiting. The squad loaded into the transport, breath visible in the night chill. The engine roared. Metal rattled. She sat near the door, hands resting on her knees. Tors sat across from her, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. She envied his faith. Hers had burned away long ago, replaced by something harder. The ride was long, but no one spoke much. Only the sound of wheels crushing gravel, gears grinding up broken roads. She watched the world blur past through the slit of the door. Hills dark against darker sky. A horizon without promise. She thought of her brother again. His voice. His laugh. The way he used to tell her she'd outshine them all someday. And how wrong he'd been, not because she hadn't risen, but because they'd never let her shine. They'd kept her in the shadows. But tonight, shadows would be her weapon. The transport slowed, stopped. The sergeant barked, "Out, move." Boots hit dirt. Cold bit at her skin. The wind carried a faint metallic scent, as if the earth itself had bled. She crouched, scanning the dark, eyes adjusting, ears catching every sound. The night wasn't silent. It never was. It breathed, shifted, whispered. The kind of silence that made your heart pound against your ribs. Tors moved up beside her, his whisper low, careful, "You good?" She nodded once, nothing more. The team pushed forward, silhouettes melting into broken ground. She followed, every step measured, her rifle case heavy but comforting against her shoulder. They crept toward the ridge where their target lay, an outpost, small but guarded, the kind of place reports called minor, the kind of place that ate men alive. Her pulse steadied as they neared, breath slow, focus narrowing. But then a sound, faint, quick, a scrape against stone. She froze, raised her hand. The team halted. Eyes scanned. Nothing, just wind, just night. Or maybe not. She kept her hand raised, heartbeat steady despite the unease clawing her chest. Her instincts screamed louder than the silence. Something was wrong. But no one said anything. No one ever did when she raised her hand. The sergeant brushed past, muttering, "False alarm, keep moving." And just like that, the moment passed. But she knew better. Because silence hides more than it reveals. And tonight, it was hiding something she wasn't ready to face. Not yet. What happens when your instincts scream, but no one listens? She stayed crouched in the dirt, fingers digging into the cold earth as the squad pressed forward. They moved like shadows, boots crunching faintly, rifles glinting in the thin starlight. To anyone else, the silence of the ridge meant safety. To her, it meant a trap waiting to exhale. But she swallowed it, spoke nothing. Because if she said it out loud, if she warned them again, they'd roll their eyes, mutter under their breath. They'd think she was nervous, maybe even scared. A distraction. She wasn't scared, not exactly. She just lived long enough to know that silence isn't empty, it's loaded. The sergeant raised his hand, signaling a halt. The squad dropped low. Fingers pointed toward the outpost below, dim lights flickering through fog. 2 guards paced the perimeter, their rifles lazy across their shoulders. A satellite dish leaned against one corner, its wires tangled like veins. The sergeant whispered, 2 out front, 1 on the tower, maybe more inside. We breach the side door, fast and clean. Get the intel, exfil in 20. Heads nodded. Tors exhaled slow, lips tight. Someone tapped their rifle stock nervously. She just watched. The outpost looked ordinary, too ordinary. She'd seen real guard work before, men sharp, shoulders rigid, eyes cutting through the dark. These men looked bored, sloppy. That wasn't carelessness, that was bait. Her chest tightened, she almost spoke, almost said, "This is wrong." But then the sergeant's eyes cut to her, not unkind but firm. You're on overwatch, find your nest, give us cover. Orders, short, clear, final. She gave a small nod. No hesitation, no objection, she knew her place. Or at least the place they gave her. She peeled off from the group, hugging the rocks as she climbed the slope. Her boots found quiet footholds, her breath kept low. The ridge leveled out into a perch overlooking the outpost. From here, the world looked stripped of detail. Just angles, shadows, shapes. She unzipped the case, laid out her rifle. The scope's glass caught a fragment of moonlight before she adjusted it, breath fogging briefly across the lens. She steadied it on the ledge, cheek pressing against the stock. Through the scope, the guards looked close enough to touch. Their footsteps dragged, their heads dipped, careless or pretending to be. Her finger brushed the trigger, not pressing, just remembering. The cold curve, the weight of choice. She let out a breath, in, out, slow. And in that silence, her mind slipped back uninvited, unwelcome, to the last time she'd been behind a scope with this much weight on her chest. It had been her brother's patrol. She wasn't on the roster that night. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that ridge. But she'd climbed it anyway, heart hammering, scope trained, waiting for him to appear. She'd seen the ambush before it happened. Figures in the dark, crouched, waiting. She shouted into the radio, voice shaking, demanding they pull back. But they hadn't listened then, either. The explosion lit the night like a second sun. And by the time the smoke cleared, her brother was gone. No body, no trace, just silence. The same silence pressing down on her now. Her hands tightened on the rifle. She blinked hard, dragging herself back to the present. Different mission, different night. But the silence was the same, and silence never came empty. Below, the squad moved into position. She tracked them through the scope, Torres at the rear, his movements careful, deliberate, like someone always waiting for orders. The sergeant up front, hands signaling the approach. They reached the side door. The breacher set the charge. A faint red light blinked, ticking seconds. Her breath caught. The guards still hadn't moved, not even a glance at the soundless shadows near their door. Too still. Too wrong. The charge blew, a sharp crack, the door split. The squad rushed inside, shadows swallowed them whole. She adjusted her scope, eyes darting, waiting for the shift, for the guards to react, for the trap to spring. But nothing. The guards didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't move. She zoomed in, tightened the focus. And her stomach turned. The guards weren't alive. They were propped up, propped like puppets, rifles strapped to hands, helmets tilted. Their faces slack, pale, drained of anything human. She swallowed, bile rising in her throat. The outpost wasn't an outpost, it was a grave. And her team was already inside. Her throat worked, but no sound came out. She forced her hand to the radio, pressed the mic. Abort, get out, it's a trap. Static. No reply. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. She repeated, louder, urgent. Inside team, pull back, do you copy? More static. The silence had swallowed them. Her hand trembled against the rifle. For a second, she considered rushing down, breaking position, storming the door to drag them out. But that wasn't her role. That wasn't what they expected of her. Still, she closed her eyes, forced her breath steady. She couldn't save anyone if she lost control now. She had to watch, had to wait, had to be the eyes they didn't know they needed. Through the scope, she saw the first flicker. A shadow moving inside the outpost, too quick, too sharp, then another, and another. Not guards, not soldiers. Something else. Figures with faces wrapped in cloth, rifles raised high, movements rehearsed. They poured from hidden doorways, corners, cracks in the walls. Dozens, maybe more. Her chest clenched. The team was trapped inside. Her radio hissed, finally breaking. The sergeant's voice ragged, breathless. Contact, multiple hostiles. Then gunfire, loud, shattering, endless. She snapped the scope to the doorway, finger pressing the trigger. A figure appeared, rifle aimed toward the shadows. She fired. The crack split the night. The figure dropped. She shifted. Another fired. Another body hit dirt. Her breath found rhythm with the shots. Each trigger pull a heartbeat. Each echo a prayer she didn't believe in. But for everyone she dropped, 3 more appeared. Shadows multiplying, pouring like water. Her radio screamed with chaos, shouts, curses, cries cut short. Tor's voice sharp with panic. "We're pinned, they knew we were coming." Her heart slammed. She fired again and again. But her rifle was one voice in a storm of screams. And the silence she feared most wasn't outside anymore. It was closing in from within. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Her rifle barrel smoked, hands shaking as she reloaded, eyes stinging from sweat. The squad's voices grew fewer, thinner, until at last only Tor's voice broke through. "Sniper, do you hear me? Please." A burst of gunfire cut him off. She froze, scope empty, doorway swallowed in dark. Her chest heaved, her fingers slipped from the rifle. For a second she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The ridge spun beneath her, the ground tilted, the silence pressed harder than ever. Had she failed them? Had she failed him again? The radio hissed one last time, a whisper, weak, broken. "Not your fault." Then nothing. Just silence. And this time she couldn't tell if the silence was outside her or inside her. How long can silence last before it breaks you? She stayed on the ridge, rifle limp against her shoulder, as smoke bled from the outpost below. The smell carried up the slope, gunpowder, ash, something darker she didn't want to name. The night had turned into a graveyard, and every breath she took felt like a betrayal. She'd been told to watch, to cover, to follow. And she had. Now they were gone. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Tears were for another life, another version of herself that hadn't hardened into this. The war didn't leave room for softness. It only left silence. Still, silence had teeth, and right now it was tearing her apart. Her radio was dead air. The squad's voices, Tor's laugh, the sergeant's growl, the shuffle of boots in nervous rhythm, all swallowed into nothing. She wanted to throw the radio off the ridge, smash it against stone until it shattered. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because sometimes, the only thing left between you and the dark was a broken piece of plastic hissing, static in your ear. She packed her rifle, hands stiff, movements mechanical, click, slide, zip. Her body knew what to do even when her mind refused. Training was habit. Habit was survival. But survival didn't feel like enough. Not tonight. She slung the pack over her shoulder and crouched low, scanning the ground below. The outpost was quiet now. Too quiet. No muzzle flashes, no shouts, just smoldering shadows and the faint rustle of wind against broken tin. They were waiting, she knew it. Whoever had set the trap hadn't left. They'd linger, sift through the dead, collect whatever proof they wanted. Maybe they'd already dragged the bodies inside. Maybe Tor's was lying down there, staring up at the same stars she was, breath rattling, waiting for someone to come. Her chest ached. The thought of leaving him, of leaving all of them, gnawed like acid. But orders were orders. She was supposed to exfiltrate now, make contact with command, report the loss, disappear. That's what they'd expect. That's what the manual said. And yet, the folder in her pack was heavier than her rifle, heavier than her guilt. Her brother's name was still there, printed in black ink against coordinates too close to this place to be coincidence. She hadn't told anyone, hadn't dared, but she couldn't shake it. What if he was here? What if the silence wasn't just death? She climbed down the ridge slow, careful. Her boots pressed into loose dirt, rocks shifting under her weight. Every step was a decision, every step louder than it should have been. Her body told her to turn back. Her training screamed the same, but her heart was louder tonight. And her heart said, go. At the base of the ridge, the air was thicker. Smoke clung to the ground, twisting low. She crouched, slipping between boulders, her rifle raised now, cheek pressed to the stock. She moved like she'd been taught, one breath, one step, one sweep of the scope at a time. Her ears strained. Nothing but the hum of crickets in the brush, the faint whistle of wind. No voices, no movement. She reached the edge of the outpost wall and pressed her back against it, the tin cool against her jacket. Her pulse drummed in her throat. She counted 3 breaths, 4. Then she leaned just enough to peer around the corner. The yard was littered with rifles, casings, splintered wood, but no bodies. Her chest tightened. Not one. They'd been taken. She swallowed hard. Her hands trembled against the rifle. She told herself it was the cold, but she knew better. They hadn't left the dead. They'd taken them. Why? A faint sound broke the stillness, a cough, weak, human. Her breath hitched. She froze, straining her ears. Another cough, then a groan. Tors. She knew it. Something in her chest leapt, fierce and sharp. Without thinking, she moved, slipping along the wall, rifle up. Her boots stepped between shadows, her body hugging corners. The cough came again, closer now, muffled. She rounded the far side of the outpost. And there he was. Tors lay half covered in dust and blood, his face pale, his leg bent wrong. But his eyes opened when she knelt beside him. His lips pulled into something like a smile, cracked and faint. "You came," he whispered. Her throat closed. She pressed a hand against his chest, steadying him, steadying herself. "Stay quiet," she whispered back. His hand gripped hers, weak but insistent. His eyes searched hers, heavy with something unsaid. "They took the others," he rasped. "Dragged them inside. They weren't dead, not all." Her stomach dropped. Not dead. Not all. The silence wasn't just death, it was worse. She scanned the walls, the yard, the shadows, no movement, but she felt eyes. She always did in places like this. "We have to go," she whispered. Tors coughed again, shook his head. "Can't run, not like this, but you can." Her jaw tightened. She looked at his leg, twisted, mangled. He was right. He couldn't move fast enough. But leaving him wasn't an option, not tonight. She pulled his arm over her shoulder, heaved him up slow, biting back a groan as his weight pressed into her side. He winced but didn't cry out. Together, they hobbled toward the shadows along the wall. Each step felt like dragging time itself. When they reached cover, she lowered him gently behind a pile of broken crates. His breath rattled, shallow. His eyes closed, but his hand found hers again. "Don't waste it," he whispered. "Waste what?" she asked, her voice sharp, desperate. "This chance." His fingers tightened, then slackened. His breath slowed, steadied, faint. He wasn't gone, not yet, but he was close. Her eyes burned, but still no tears came. She brushed a hand against his forehead, then pulled back, jaw set. She looked at the outpost, its shadows yawning like a wound. Her brother's name, the squad taken, Tors broken but alive. Every path split in front of her, retreat, report, or go inside. Every voice in her head screamed different things, duty, survival, guilt, hope. And somewhere beneath it all, one voice cut sharper than the rest. Her brother. Don't stop. Her grip tightened on the rifle. She wasn't going to stop. Not this time. She rose from the crates, breath slow, steady. Her boots pressed silent against the dirt as she crept toward the dark mouth of the outpost. Order said leave. Fear said run. But her heart said something else. Go in. And for the first time that night, she listened. What waits in the dark when you choose to walk into it? Her boots touched the threshold of the outpost door, the blackened metal frame still warm from the breacher's charge. Smoke clung to the edges, curling upward like the last breath of something dying. She stopped just outside, her chest rising, falling, each inhale slower than the last. One step and she would be breaking everything. Orders, rules, the last fragile thread that kept her tethered to the world outside. But behind this door might be the truth she'd been chasing for years. Her brother, the squad. Tor's words still burned inside her, not all of them were dead. She closed her eyes, fingers brushing the stock of her rifle. She had always followed orders, always swallowed the doubt, the anger, the silence. But tonight, the silence had grown teeth, and if she didn't break it, it would devour her. Her eyes opened. She stepped inside. The air hit her first, damp, sour, heavy with iron. The kind of air that stuck to the back of your throat and didn't let go. Her boots pressed against a floor slick with something she didn't want to name. The corridor stretched narrow, lit by a single flickering bulb that swung faintly on its wire. Its hum echoed like a heartbeat, too slow, too uneven. Her rifle raised, cheek pressed to the stock, she crept forward. Each step felt louder than it should have been. Her breath caught, released in controlled bursts. She wanted to steady her heart, but the weight in her chest refused. A sound drifted down the hall, faint, rhythmic, chains rattling. She froze, listened. Not machines, not metal against stone, chains. Her jaw tightened, she moved toward it. The corridor split at a corner and she leaned just enough to see. The hall opened into a larger room, half in shadow. Shapes lined the walls, crude cages welded from rebar and wire mesh. And inside them, movement. Figures. Her pulse spiked. She inched closer, boots sliding silent, scope sweeping each cage. Faces stared back through the dark. Soldiers, her squad. Their eyes wide, their mouths gagged with cloth, wrists bound in wire. Some slumped, half-conscious. Others pressed against the bars, eyes burning with fury or fear. Alive. She swallowed hard, throat thick. Relief slammed into her chest so fast it nearly broke her. For a second, she thought she might collapse. They weren't gone. Not all. But then her stomach twisted again. Why cages? Why here? She stepped closer, her rifle sweeping. A pair of eyes locked on hers, the sergeant. His face bloodied, one eye swollen shut. But his gaze sharpened the moment he saw her. Recognition, disbelief, then a flare of anger. He shook his head violently, lips forming words against the gag. Go, run. Her gut clenched. He wasn't relieved to see her. He was terrified. Before she could move, a voice slipped through the shadows. You shouldn't be here. It wasn't shouted. It was calm, too calm. Her rifle snapped toward the sound. From the far corner, a figure stepped into the dim light. Tall, lean, wrapped in dark cloth. His hands were bare, fingers long, delicate like someone who'd never worked the land or carried a weapon for survival. But he carried one now. An old rifle, held low, casual, as if it wasn't a weapon but an extension of himself. His eyes locked on hers, steady, unblinking. You followed the silence, he said softly, almost like admiration. Most run from it, but you walked straight in. Her breath steadied against the rifle. She said nothing. He tilted his head, studying her the way one studies a puzzle. They told you women couldn't lead, that you were a distraction, a risk, but here you are, leading yourself. Her jaw clenched, her finger tightened against the trigger. Where are the rest? She demanded, her voice low, sharp. He smiled faintly, not cruel, almost gentle. They're alive for now, because silence doesn't just kill, it chooses. She narrowed her eyes, his words twisted like smoke, too careful. You set this trap. He didn't flinch. I opened a door, your leaders walked you through it. Her chest tightened. Anger flared, but beneath it, something colder, a recognition she didn't want to admit. She'd seen the reports, she'd known the coordinates, this wasn't random. He stepped closer, slowly, his rifle still low. Tell me, why are you really here? Her heart hammered. Her brother's name flashed in her mind, the folder in her pack, the secret she hadn't shared with anyone. She swallowed hard, eyes steady through the scope, to take them home. His smile faded, his head tilted, eyes searching hers. That's not all. She didn't answer, couldn't. The silence stretched between them, thick, heavy. And in that silence, something moved. Behind him, a figure slumped against the wall, half hidden in shadow, bound, bloodied, but his face. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. It was her brother. Her knees nearly buckled. Her rifle wavered for the first time all night. He was thinner, bruised, his beard unkempt, eyes hollowed from months, maybe years of captivity. But it was him. Her brother. Alive. The man's voice cut through her chest like a blade. Now you understand why I left them alive, why I let you come this far. Her eyes darted between him and her brother, her chest tight enough to break. This wasn't just a trap, it was something else. A message, a choice. Take your squad, the man said softly. Take them and go, leave him, he stays. Her pulse slammed, her throat closed. Leave him after all this, after years of silence. Her brother's eyes met hers, wide, pleading, desperate. The sergeant's muffled voice hissed from the cage, words she couldn't fully hear but didn't need to. His eyes said enough. Don't do it. Don't break yourself here. Her rifle trembled against her shoulder. Every part of her wanted to scream, to pull the trigger, to burn this place down. But her heart knew the truth. One wrong move and they'd all die. And she had no backup, no orders to lean on, no permission. Only her choice. Only her strength. She exhaled slow, steady. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Silence pressed in. The kind of silence that demanded an answer. How far will you go to keep a promise you never spoke aloud? She felt every heartbeat as if it were a footstep in the dark. The room's air hung heavy, hot, sour, intimate, like a wound that wouldn't scab. Her brother sat slumped in the shadow, thin as a memory, eyes fixed on her as if he'd been saving every spare piece of breath for this moment. Around him, the squad's faces blurred into cages and wire, each one a story she'd been entrusted to finish. Her hands shook, not from cold, not from fatigue, from a calculus no manual prepared you for, one life pressed against many, a single axis that could tilt everything into ruin or rescue. She had been taught to measure risk in grids and timelines, to reduce chaos into problem sets. But this wasn't a grid. This was viscera. This was her brother's name inked in a folder she'd carried like contraband. This was the promise she'd made to herself the night she swore she would bring him home, even if the whole world insisted she wouldn't. She stepped closer to the cage until the sergeant's bruised face filled her scope. He spat through his gag, eyes burning not with relief but with accusation. He mouthed words that needed no sound. Don't let him make you trade what we are. The man who'd captured them watched with patient curiosity. He had the air of someone who'd rehearsed this evening like a play, savoring the moment his audience finally noticed the stage. His voice was soft. You aren't the first to face this, he said. You won't be the last. Her jaw tightened. Why, she asked, though she already knew this question had more bones than answer. Why take soldiers? Why keep her brother? Why weave pain into a lesson for someone like her? He tilted his head. Because words are cheap. Because men with medals kept walking past what I could not forgive. Because a single choice you make in this room will speak louder than their proclamations. It will echo. Echoes? He wanted an echo. She understood then that this was less about ransom than about rewriting a map, drawing new lines in the sand and forcing her, a woman, to cross them publicly, to prove something, or to fail. Her mind flicked through the faces behind the bars. Tors, breath shallow, eyes like a child, in the dark. The corporal with the cigarette-smoked laugh who had taught her how to disassemble an engine during a blackout. The medic who hummed old country songs to keep his hands steady. Men who had been human before they were labels on a roster. Her hands clenched until her knuckles whitened. The choice the man demanded felt obscene in its simplicity. Walk away with the squad, leave her brother, or take him and leave the others. He spoke as if moral calculus could be posited on a chalkboard, but lives do not obey equations. "Make it quick," she said. Her voice sounded small in the room. Brave words, though. Brave, brittle. She hated how small she sounded. She hated that his eyes skimmed over her like water, waiting to see which truth she would pick. He chuckled softly. "I gave you the easiest choice." But there was nothing easy here. Not when memory snapped into being the night her brother had disappeared, the hollow of absence that never filled, the years she'd spent in quiet reconnaissance, in cold dossiers, in pretending the ache had calcified into something useful. She realized how much of her had been built of vows she never spoke. This room stripped them bare. Her brother's breath rasped. He leaned forward, voice a thread. "You can't leave them." She swallowed. His eyes held no accusation, only a plea edged in something feral. "Do not become like them, trading lives like currency." She looked at the sergeant. He met her gaze with a steady, wounded look that said, "We trusted you to keep us, not to bargain us away." The layers of obligation pressed against her ribs, duty, blood, camaraderie. She'd always been taught that duty came first. But whose duty? To whom? Her mind raced, searching for a seam, a place to pry the problem open without fracturing what remained. She scanned the room, noticing small details. The way the captor's boots were scuffed not by rough terrain but by polished floors, the faint scent of cedar wood that traveled from his collar, a hint of a life led somewhere else. He seemed to relish the moral theater more than the stakes. That gave her a sliver of leverage. People who perform often overreach. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice until it matched the shadows. "If you want a message, there's a way to send it that doesn't end with dead men." The captor's smile thinned. "And what would you suggest?" She set the rifle gently against the floor, hands open, palms visible. A deliberate move to show her was wary but not reckless. She'd read once that showing the hand sometimes calms the table. A demonstration, a public one. "We can bring what you want to the world without killing these men." He considered. The room smelled of old cigarettes and iron and fear. Then he shook his head. "Too easy. I wanted to see if you would choose. I wanted to see if someone they dismissed could be made to kneel." The word kneel hit like a blow. She thought of every time they dismissed her, promotions passed by, leers in barracks, quiet jokes at the mess. She had built her life around not kneeling, around becoming solid enough that no one could push her over. He was daring her to break that. She could feel her reflection sharpening into resolve. She thought about the faces again, her brother, Tors, the sergeant, and a plan assembled, not from tactics but from stubbornness. She would not let this man dictate what dignity meant for them. If he wanted a message, she would craft one he hadn't imagined. A message that spoke without letting him claim their suffering. "Tell me what you want," she said. "Tell me what your demand is. Not riddles, not theatrical choices. Tell me facts." He paused as if tasting the word facts like something exotic. "I will tell you, and then I will give you a chance to prove you understand the cost of silence." She hated the way his words made her world constrict. "Go on." He told her of a compound 2 valleys over where food and medicine and men in suits came and left under the cover of NGOs. He spoke of convoys that never reached the poor, of shipments that vanished into other hands. He recited names and dates with the calmness of someone who'd cataloged betrayals for a long time. His voice pulled images out of the air, children waiting for medicine that never came, old men dying with clean water passing their lips. She listened, and with every detail her pulse quickened in a different cadence. Anger, then grief, then an icy clarity. He wasn't only a witch hunter. He was a man who had seen a pattern and chosen to punish one link. He had built a theater to make the strong feel the tremor small men felt for years. When he finished, he looked at her. "You can topple one pillar, bring the proof to the light, expose them, or you can walk out now with your squad intact and keep the system as it is." Words like that could be circular traps. She thought of the men in power who always had plausible deniability. signatures buried in paperwork, names lost in bureaucracy. She thought of the silence that lets evil wear the embroidered sash of legitimacy. She thought of the folder in her pack and how she had been following tracks that almost always ended in stone walls and closed doors. The sergeant's throat worked. He spat out a name, muffled but clear. It was one she'd seen on the list of contractors, someone who had used his position to move resources into pockets. Her stomach turned. This was no random act. It was chiseling away at a rot she had sensed but never seen. Her mind split into two lines of thought and she could follow them both at once: the soldiers. Neutralize captor, free squad, exit. The other, the person she was when the uniform came off. Expose the rotten seam and make it leak into light. Both were right. Both could be right. Both required choices that could break things. She squared her shoulders. "I'll do it," she said. The words felt dangerous as a promise and honest as prayer. "But not your way." He smiled, small and surprised. "That is what makes you interesting," he said. "How do you intend to proceed?" She told him nothing of plans, not yet. But she offered him a pivot. Release the non-critical captives now, let her go as a messenger, give him the satisfaction of watching the system tremble from outside, not from inside the cages. It was a gauntlet thrown, risky, because trusting him was trusting a man who already trusted force over consent. But she found she did not desire a martyrdom that cost the men who had already paid enough. He deliberated, then only nodded. "A test of faith," he said. "You betray them or you save them, publicly." She stepped closer to the bars. Her brother's eyes met hers, brittle hope and an old, fierce love. He mouthed, "Do it." The sergeant scowled, as if reminding her that any deal was a razor's edge. She turned to the captor. "I will bring evidence. I will bring names, papers, roots. I will make them answer. You will have your proof, but you will not kill them for my compliance." The man's fingers curled around the butt of his rifle. After a long moment he nodded once. "One night, public exposure. If you fail, they die." The room shrank into black and white clarity. She felt both the drop of fear and the bloom of resolve. Fear said run. Resolve said this was the moment she'd been preparing for, not through ranks but through the ache that had followed her like a dog since the day her brother vanished. "All right," she said, "one night." She felt fragile then and impossibly whole, like glass threaded with steel. She had made a choice, not perfect, not pure, but hers. Tor's coughed, breath ragged. Don't make us pay for what they did," he whispered. She flexed her fingers around the bars, feeling the cold metal. "I won't," she said. It was not a promise the world could guarantee. It was a vow she would carry like a compass. As they set the terms and plans formed and fell into place, a small, bitter thought echoed in her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And tonight, bowed by impossible options, she would act. How do you prepare to lie to save the people you love? She woke with the taste of rust in her mouth. The room smelled of cold metal and dust that had settled into everything it touched. Outside, morning light tried to push through a slit in the shutter and failed, as if daylight itself hesitated to enter that place. She moved slowly, like she was learning how to be a body again. Her muscles protested. The night had left them raw. Her mind raced faster than her limbs. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you reckless. Hope made promises sound like plans. She reminded herself of that as she crouched beside the cages and saw the men hollowed but alive. Each face told her a small story, jokes swallowed, regrets rehearsed, hands that had fixed radios and patched wounds now trembling. She felt compassion like a physical ache. Tors looked up at her when she sat. He tried for a grin, but it cracked into a gasp. "Did you sleep?" he rasped. "Barely." She kept her voice flat, controlled. Lying was a skill she'd learned early. Tonight it would be a sharpened tool. "Listen, we get one night, we use it smart." He blinked, confusion and relief mingling. "You sure about this? About trusting him?" She met his eyes. "I don't trust him, I use him." An ugly calculus, but honest. She moved through the small routines that kept men anchored, checking bandages, secreting small rations, whispering names. The sergeant watched her with a quiet anger that had softened into something like respect. He didn't speak much, but his jaw relaxed a fraction when he saw her moving among them, giving orders as if she belonged to a rank she'd been denied. That small nod from him was a strange kind of absolution. Outside the compound, the captor paced with an almost ceremonial calm. He let her watch him as she moved in and out of the dim corridor. He was everywhere and nowhere, a man who understood control as a slow, constant pressure. He'd given her the terms: bring proof in one night, make the powerful answer, or they die. He'd given her a time limit and a knife-edge consequence. She knew the world he wanted to carve into. She also knew that people in power liked shadows. They traded favors in the half-light. To expose them, you needed light so bright it left no corner untouched. That meant papers, ledgers, manifests, things you couldn't fake on a rumor. It meant a route, a name, a face. Proof. He had told her where to start: a mid-level contractor who moved aid with a crooked smile. The captor had left a trail, a name, a place, a pattern. He'd taken care to make it verifiable. Maybe he wanted to see her climb a ladder and then fall. Maybe he wanted to turn her into a spectacle. Or maybe, in a different language, he wanted the same thing she did, to see rot exposed. She couldn't tell which motive scared her more. Her plan unfolded in pieces. First, win a moment of freedom outside the cages. Second, acquire a device, a small recorder and a satellite transmitter they used for emergency beacons, hidden in the supply room. Third, get the proof, ledger pages, scanned manifests from a small safe in the compound's back office. Fourth, get out with the evidence and broadcast. Simple in theory, brutal in reality. She set the actors. Tors would feign collapse at dusk, forcing the captor's men to fetch a medic. The captor, predictably meticulous, would not leave the compound. He would leave 2 guards behind. That would be her gap. A narrow window, but a window nonetheless. She slipped into the guards' routine the night before like a shadow. She learned their rhythms. The tea at 18:30, the cigarette by the gate, the way one of them always scratched his left elbow when nervous. Small things become maps when you pay attention. When dusk fell, the compound exhaled. Men traded cigarettes, laughed with a brittle edge, moved with the easy confidence of those who believe themselves safe. She felt hollow with anticipation, 1 part terror, 2 parts focus. Her chest ached with the weight of what she had promised these men. Pride, too, flickered like a candle, a private, insolent flame. She thought of the old days in training when someone told her she couldn't lead because she was soft. She'd found that softness, long ago, was only the surface. Underneath steel. Tor's act came like clockwork. He doubled over with a convulsion, clutching his leg. The guards rushed in panic. The captor barked orders, furious, and trotted toward the infirmary. The 2 left behind were the ones whose routines she'd learned. Her chest tightened to a coiled fist. When they left, she waited, cold breath shallow. Then she moved. She slid from shadow to shadow like a thought slipping between sentences. The supply room door was old. She'd felt the lock the night before with a gloved finger and found it brittle. Her hands were steady. She picked the lock in 3 silent movements. Inside, she found what she wanted: a compact recorder, a battered satellite handset, and tucked under a stack of ration manifests, a slim envelope marked with a contractor's logo. Her fingers closed around it like salvation. She didn't have time to be triumphant. The sound of boots sliced the corridor. She snapped the lights off, swallowed her breath, and melted into the darkness. 2 guards at the entrance yawned. Routine pocked their faces. Ordinary mistakes would save her tonight. Fate had its own brittle edges. The captor returned alone, his face darker. "You did well," he said, not smiling. "You have 1 night." His eyes searched her like he was cataloging her soul. She handed him back his compliment with a steady gaze and with a practiced calm said, "And then?" He shrugged, "Then the world decides." She left him with those words curling in her thoughts. Outside, night felt less like a sky and more like a thin sheet over everything. She, stolen only the pages, not photographs, not whole ledgers, but enough to point a spotlight. Enough to make a man in a suit sweat. Enough to create a scandal if she could get the signal out. The hardest part, getting away, was softened by the captor's theater. He'd given her the illusion of freedom to prove she wasn't simply a puppet. The moment she had the envelope, she noticed a different stiffness in the guard's shoulders. Men who expect violence smell it before it arrives. She moved but one misstep away from everything unraveling. Her heart thudded as she slipped through the back passage toward the yard. She kept to the shadows, the dead spaces, the places a patrol wouldn't bother to check twice. Her palms were slick, but her face was calm. She put the recorder to her lips and whispered the names and dates the captor had told her. She cataloged them as if reciting an inventory. Her voice was steady in the small device. Every word felt like a brick in a bridge back to the world. The transmitter she'd found required a line of sight to a patch of sky. She climbed the compound's low wall, fingers scraping, breath burning. The night sky opened above like a bruise. She set the handset, keyed the frequencies she'd stolen from a mechanic's notebook the day before, and pressed send. For a moment nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then the device chirped a small, blessed noise, and a message went up into the ether. She had seconds to get back, to make it look like she'd never left. She slid back into the dark, heart a drum, and dropped into the supply room. The captor's men were where she'd left them, fidgeting, running through routines. Nobody noticed the woman who returned with dirt on her boots and calm in her voice. On her return, she found the men hungry, restless. The sergeant's gaze met hers, sharp with worry. He mouthed, "You got it." She answered by pressing the envelope into the bars. He took it, fingers shaking, and nodded. That small, defiant act felt like a sacrament. The captor's face moved in the dim light like a tide. He watched them with something like curiosity, then turned and walked away. He had given her the chance, and now she had to use it. She felt the weight of their lives like a stone in her pack. The recorder hummed against her thigh. She had begun the process. She had started the avalanche that might save them. In the lull that followed, her brother found the strength to sit up. He caught her hand through the bars, eyes ringed with pain but steady. "You did good," he whispered. The words were small, but they burned through the hollowness. He sounded older, but no less him. She slid her hand along the metal and felt his pulse like a live thing. Determination, quiet and terrible, rose in her chest. They had one night, one shot. She sent a signal. She'd stolen proof. The rest depended on whether the world would listen or whether it preferred its comfortable darkness. She thought of the captor again as she prepared to sleep, if sleep would come. Maybe he wanted to manufacture a hero or a broken woman to use as a lesson. Maybe he wanted to be a mirror that reflected a truth people refused to face. She couldn't read him like scripture. She only knew the shape of her own next step. Outside, the compound hummed with ordinary life, a song of small things that almost sounded like peace. Inside, men breathed with the weight of choices they hadn't made. She lay on the cold floor with her back against the bars and stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts ran over the faces, the medic humming old songs, the corporal who loved cheap whiskey, Torres with his crooked grin. Their stories braided with her own like thread. She had promised to keep them intact. She stolen a tool to make that promise real. In the half-light, she whispered to the dark, not sure if prayer or plan. "One night, make it count." The silence that answered her felt less like threat and more like a question. And for the first time since the mission began, she believed she could answer. What does a night feel like when the world outside waits for you to fail? She lay with her back against the cold stone, listening to every small sound as if each were a verdict. The hum of a generator, the cough of a guard, the low murmur of two men arguing about rations in the corner. Even silence carried a weight, like the whole compound was watching her breathe. Her brother slept in bursts beside the others, body jerking with fever dreams. She wanted to shake him awake, to hold him like she used to when he was a boy, when nightmares were nothing but shadows on a wall. But here, in this place, shadows had teeth. She kept her hand on the bar between them as if her touch could anchor him. The recorder sat hidden in her pack, Evidence already carried skyward, whispering truths to whoever might be listening. But sending wasn't enough. Proof had to land somewhere that mattered, somewhere that couldn't be swept under a rug. She had no guarantee the signal reached the right ears. Maybe it was floating in the ether like a lost prayer. Maybe it had already been buried by men who understood the art of silence. Her chest tightened with the old ache, the one that always rose when she thought of how little the world wanted to change. She wondered if she'd built her entire life chasing promises it never intended to keep. But then Tors shifted, muttering her name in his half-sleep, and the ache twisted into resolve. If she gave in now, she'd prove every sneer at the academy right. Women can't lead. Women can't hold the line. She'd spent years burning those words out of her marrow. Tonight she would not let them come back. The sergeant stirred. His eyes found her in the dim light, tired but clear. "What's the plan?" he whispered. She hesitated. He deserved the truth, but the truth was a knife, that her plan relied on the world outside caring enough to act, that she had done everything she could, but the outcome was no longer hers to shape. She wanted to tell him something solid, something that sounded like command. Instead, she leaned close and said, "We hold until morning. Help is coming." His face didn't change, but something softened in his eyes, not belief, but faith in her. It was heavier than doubt. Hours bled slow, guards rotated. The compound stank of damp earth and sweat. She memorized their steps, their habits, their little rituals. She was always watching, always counting. It kept her from unraveling. Near midnight she felt the shift before she heard it, a vibration underfoot, faint but steady. Then the distant thrum of rotors cutting through the stillness. Helicopter. Military. Too precise to be local smugglers. Her breath caught in her throat. The world had heard. The men stirred, eyes wide, hope sparking like fire in dry grass. Tors sat up too fast and nearly fell over. The sergeant gripped the bars, whispering, "They're coming." But hope was dangerous. She knew better than to taste it too soon. She raised her hand, silencing them. "Quiet," she mouthed. Every sound could betray them. The captor appeared then, calm as ever, eyes gleaming with something unreadable. He had heard it too. His gaze moved from her to the ceiling, then back again. "You called them," he said, not accusation, almost admiration. She straightened, every nerve awire. "I gave the truth wings," she said. He stepped closer, voice low. "Do you think truth comes without cost?" Her jaw locked. Cost is already here. For the first time, his face cracked into something like anger. "You think they will save you, but when men with power come, they do not save, they clean, they erase." He leaned close, voice a hiss. "If they come, it will be to burn this place down and you with it." His words landed like stones. She knew he wasn't wrong. She'd seen it before, rescues that were really cover-ups, loose ends tied with blood. Her chest hollowed with a new terror. She had delivered proof, but she may have delivered herself and her squad into the fire. The thrum grew louder, blades chewing the sky. Searchlights cut across the valley. The guards scrambled, shouting orders, rifles clattering. The prisoners pressed against the bars, desperate. She acted. Moving fast, she pulled the envelope of documents from her pack, shoved it into the sergeant's hands. "If I fall, you keep this," she whispered. He stared at her, stunned, then nodded with a grim weight. Tors grabbed her wrist. His eyes were fever-bright. "Don't leave me again." Her throat closed, but she forced the words out. "I won't." The compound shook as flares bloomed in the sky, painting everything in violent orange. Gunfire cracked in the distance. The captor stood at the center of it all, calm as stone, as if the chaos was his sermon. "You wanted to prove them wrong," he said to her. "Here is your chance. Lead without permission. Lead when every choice will stain you." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she pulled the rifle into her hands, checked the chamber, and turned to the men behind the bars. Their eyes burned with trust, fear, and the kind of hope that hurts to hold. The roar outside grew deafening. Firelight licked the compound walls. The night had broken open, and the world was pouring in. She took a breath that felt like the edge of a cliff. Her voice came out steady, carrying over the noise. "Stay low, follow my word, we live together or we don't live at all." For a moment silence hung between them, heavy and absolute. Then a nod from the sergeant, a whisper from Tors, a ripple of courage through the cages. The captor watched, his expression unreadable, as if this was the scene he had been waiting for all along. And she understood. Dawn was coming, but it would not be gentle. It would test everything she had claimed to be. Why does the world always feel louder the moment everything depends on your next breath? She could hear it before she saw it. The raw, animal sound of engines, the bark of orders, the metallic report of rifles answering each other like old grudges. Light tore the sky into pieces, searchlights working like interrogation lamps, flares blossoming and falling like angry flowers. The compound had become a wound exposed to the stars. Her palms shook as she shouldered the rifle, not with fear now, with a terrible, electric clarity. Every training exercise, every quiet hour spent cataloging routines, every whispered promise to the men behind the bars had led her to this crooked, impossible morning. Tors caught her eye through the wire, his face streaked with dirt and blood. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to that look. A plea, a joke they never made aloud, the kid's crooked grin that had been brave enough to ride out a storm. "You ready?" he mouthed. She pressed her lips together, the shape of yes forming like a small knife. "Always." Outside, soldiers moved like a tide. They were not the saviors she'd imagined in training films. They were calculated, blunt, methodical, men with clipped commands and tired faces. A banner of authority that could close ranks or close secrets. She'd long ago learned the difference between being rescued and being cleaned up. Tonight she needed both rescue and reckoning, and the two did not always travel on the same road. The captor stood in the center of the yard as if he'd been born to theatrics, hands folded, watching the scene like a man watching his favorite play. His eyes found hers, and there was no surprise there. He'd expected fireworks. He'd expected choices that would bleed meaning into men's bones. He'd expected her to kneel or bargain or break. Instead, she'd brought a different thing, a plan. She moved when the sergeant nodded, a small, tight motion. The plan was simple in theory and complicated in practice. Use the confusion of the incoming force and the captor's insistence on spectacle to wedge open the compound long enough to get the men out. No heroics, no grand charges, small movements, timing, a handful of lies masked as truth. She slid close to the cages, pressed her voice low. "When the first team breaches, we move on my signal. One door, two doors, then run low, then left through the drainage. Go fast. Don't stop." The sergeant's jaw worked. "You're sure?" She looked at his hands, those hands that had once jammed a radio together in the rain and kept a dying man breathing long enough for the medevac to find him. "I'm sure." That was all he needed. The first bang cracked like thunder. Shouts cascaded. Men in heavy boots pushed into the yard, voices booming. The captor barked back, not with fear but with a grin that tasted like challenge. He wanted an ending with moral clarity. He wanted her to choose in view of witnesses. He wanted a public collapse. Instead, she chose motion. She slipped through the narrow gap she'd mapped out the night before, a crawl space behind a stack of crates that led to the drainage channel. She'd pried open the grating with her pocketed multi-tool and left it ajar for exactly this moment. The air smelled of wet earth and rust. It felt like a wound that wanted closing. One by one she led them through. The medic, muttering a vow under his breath about bad coffee and worse luck. The corporal who still joked about the price of contraband cigs. The sergeant, who moved with a slow dignity that was both weary and unbreakable. Tors came last, leaning on her shoulder, biting down on a cry she didn't let him make. Their steps were wet, the water cold enough to bite bones. The drain spat them into scrubland beyond the compound wall, a little space of world that felt like permission to breathe. Behind them, the compound had erupted into a different kind of chaos. Men shouting, armored men moving with clipped efficiency, flares cracking. But the captor's voice rose above it all, not with anger but with triumph. "You had your chance," he called across the night. "You could have made them suffer for the sins you accuse. You didn't." She didn't answer, because the night was busy with other noises. The soft click of her radio as a distressed voice came through, a voice she'd hacked into earlier and routed to a sympathetic reporter's sat line. The recorder she'd sent had landed where she'd hoped, in hands that would not ignore it. The proof of misdirected aid, the manifests, the names, they were live, and they were being read aloud by someone who had the power to make a minister's mourning uncomfortable. Her throat tightened. Exposure worked slowly like a fever. Some things burned, some things smoldered. She had bought them time by making noise, by forcing the captor to fight on a stage he'd constructed. Now the stage was as likely to work for her as against her. They crawled through barbed wire and thorn until dawn finally began to bleed light into the sky like forgiveness. The world looked ordinary and astonishing at once. A bird landed on a broken fence post, unbothered by human tragedy. She felt strangely glad for that small indifference. It meant life tried to continue. They didn't make it far before the sound of vehicles turned into the hiss of radios. The authorities outside were not monolithic. Men in different uniforms conferred with unit leaders. A civilian van idled with a woman in a high-visibility vest, and a camera draped like an accusation around her neck. She'd never believed in cinematic justice, but she believed in people doing the right thing under the right pressure. Sometimes the pressure was the public's eye. They found cover in a ruined farmhouse while the others coordinated a pickup. Her brother slumped beside her beneath a tarp, feverish and filthy, but his hand found hers and gripped. He was alive. The grip said that much and everything else at once. She closed her eyes and let the relief come in small, noisy sobs that felt more like the jammed air leaving a chamber. They were safe for the moment, not whole, not unscarred, but breathing. Then the radio crackled with voices she had not counted on. High-ranking officers, pressed and cautious, asking for statements, for logs, for names. They wanted the story neat, tidy enough for a press release, small enough to be absorbed and then discarded. She listened as a bureaucrat discussed asset recovery, while a colonel asked tersely for the names of those involved in the operation. The language of containment blossomed fast. Her chest tightened with the old knowledge. The powerful often preferred tidy boxes to messy admissions. They would rescue, they would commend, and then they would move on. The contractor whose ledger she'd stolen might be arrested quietly, shuffled into a courtroom where the press would see a different story, or he might be slipped a file that made him untouchable. There were too many ways for light to be bent. She could step into that neatness and let the system take credit. She could accept medals designed to be comfortable to the people who gave them. Or she could make a different, quieter choice that would cost her something they could never take back, something that felt like truth. Her brother's hand was warm in hers. She thought of the captor's words about echoes and choices. She thought of the sergeant's bruised face, the medic's tired hands, Tor's crooked grin. She thought of every small slight said to her in mess halls and promotion boards. She had a name to put in a file, a ledger to hand over, a live tape with details that could burn reputations. She also had the bodies of men who had trusted her to save them without collateral damage. When the colonel asked for a testimony, a recounting the kind that could be footnoted away, she surprised herself by saying something else. Her voice was rough with sleep and spent courage. "We were ambushed," she said plainly. "We were betrayed. You'll find the ledger we brought. That man set a stage to make us choose. He wanted spectacle." There was a pause heavy enough to be a sentence. Then she went on. "But if you want accountability, look beyond the arrests. Look at the structure that allowed aid to be misdirected. Hold the contractors to public scrutiny. Bring auditors, open the books. Let the people who paid for relief know where it went." The colonel's response was a careful murmur. She could see the calculations flicker in his eyes. He was weighing optics against consequence. He would prefer quiet. He would prefer a clean headline. She could feel the ledger's weight in her pack like a living thing, urging her toward louder, harder things. Then, as if the world needed contrived theater to move, the journalist she'd pinged arrived at the farmhouse, camera rolling, voice steady like a blade. The reporter read the manifests aloud into a microphone, into a world hungry for truth. The clip hit feeds before the colonel could arrange his paperwork. The names she'd been handed the night before trended inside hours. Men in suits shifted in uncomfortable chairs. Investigations were opened. Arrests were announced. Headlines demanded answers. It was messy and it was slow, and it was everything she had dared to hope for. The captor watched all this later when they'd collected statements and the men were packaged into recovery vehicles. He had wanted a public demonstration. He got one of a different sort, the slow, grinding force of institutions pried open by light. He looked at her once, an unreadable smile cutting his face. "You used the audience I gave you," he said. "You turned spectacle into scrutiny." She felt something like pity for him then. Not forgiveness, not even anger, just the pale thing you feel when you see someone who has fed on the world's cruelty until it sustains them. He was a mirror of a sort, a man who couldn't accept the compromises others made, so he corrupted the only thing he could control. Days later, statements were taken. The contractor's name made it into reports. Investigations that had once moved like glaciers started to splinter. The men who had profited from silence found subpoenas on their desks. There were hearings where cameras watched and small, bright things called consequences began, painfully, to exist. It would not fix everything. It would not bring back the dead. But it made it harder to let corruption hide behind stamped envelopes and polite nods. She gave testimony, but not the kind that absolved the powerful. She chose words that made editors pause. She refused to be polished into a comfortable story. She told the truth, about ambushes, about the rot she'd smelled, about men who used uniforms to shield quiet theft. She did not let them make her the neat moral they wanted. She insisted the ledger be public. She insisted protections for whistleblowers. She insisted, in small ways, that dignity not be priced for comfort. Her brother recovered slowly. Torres went home with a limp and a letter from someone high enough to push for medical treatment. The sergeant got a commendation he did not want and a small pension he needed. The captor was taken into custody, questioned in detail, his motives parsed and posted for a world that likes to understand monsters. Some people called him a terrorist. Others called him a vigilante. She called him a man who decided pain was a language. Standing on a hill of sparse grass weeks later, she watched the sun lift its face over a town that smelled of baking bread and diesel. Her brother stood beside her, shoulders a little straighter, hair a little shorter, scar tissue forming quiet maps on his skin. Torres sent a message from home. He'd taken a job fixing generators. The sergeant had already mailed her a small, battered patch to sew onto her jacket, his way of saying, without saying, "We saw you." She folded the patch and kept it in her pocket. It was small and nearly worthless in every ledger the world kept, but it mattered more than most official medals. When they left, there were no parades, no grand speeches. There was one quiet press conference where she stood, hands steady, and said things that would make a few men uncomfortable for a while. Then she walked away. The moral the captor wanted, a public theatrical choice that would humiliate or glorify, had been subverted into a quieter work of exposure. She'd risked medals that might have become comfortable covers for culpability. She'd risked being used and almost lost the one she loved. She learned the truth some people find bitter. Sometimes the right action looks like compromise. Sometimes it looks like cunning. Sometimes it looks like a calculated lie told to save lives. On the last morning before she disappeared back into the routines that had hardened her, she stood alone at the edge of the airfield. Wind tugged at her jacket. Planes taxied in the distance, bright as small promises. Her brother came up beside her, his hand finding hers without flourish. "You did good," he said. "Not a sermon, not praise, an ordinary truth." She let the words settle. For years she'd wanted to prove that women could lead, that strength didn't need permission. Now she had proof that leadership asked for different currencies. Patience, cruelty folded into compassion, choices that made you bleed and also saved people. She thought of all the nights she'd listened to silence and decided to answer it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She tightened her grip on her brother's hand. Around them, the world went on in its noisy, imperfect way. Pilots signaled, the sun climbed, and somewhere far away a committee prepared another round of statements. The war, the rot, the quiet theft, none of it ended that day. But a ledger was open where it had been sealed, and for now that counted. She closed her eyes and offered no prayers. Instead, she breathed in the morning the smell of rubber, of hot metal, of cheap coffee, and let the silence be what it was. Not an enemy, but a place she had learned to stand in and hear the truth. The image of her brother's steady fingers in hers, the sergeant's patch warm in her pocket, Tor's text blinking on her phone, these were the small affirmations that would carry her forward. When the camera shutter clacked one last time and a reporter's voice asked for a final comment, she only said softly, "We did what we could." Then she looked at the sky, and the world for a moment looked back.